What is sustainability? Sustainability is the means by which we can achieve our own needs without depleting the resources. This way, future generations will also be able to use the same resources for their own needs. It is a vast subject which is not limited to environmentalism. It can be incorporated in more details of our daily life. How can we travel sustainably? Sustainable travel is a way of travel in which we leave as small of a footprint as possible on the local culture and environment. In our trip, we traveled by train, boat, and we hitchhiked. We slept in tents, we rented a cabin from a local, and we were hosted by people who found us while hitchhiking. We managed to cook more than half of our meals with food from dumpster, and we also used Too Good To Go. To better understand sustainability, we visited a few local businesses where we interviewed the managers.
How to move from one place to another in a sustainable way. Sustainable transportation. Usually it refers to a transportation that is green and has low impact on the environment. It is sustainable in the senses of social, environmental, and climate impacts. For example, walking, cycling, car sharing. And talking about car sharing, well, let's stop here and talk about hitchhiking. This is something that we experienced by ourselves when traveling to our main destination, to Lofoten Islands. Our challenge that we had taken was to travel all the way from Hovang to Buro by hitchhiking and do it in 2 days. We split into 2 teams, me and Sarah and Alex Linnea. In the beginning, we were super positive and motivated and ready for the challenge. But the problem with hitchhiking is that you never know if and how it works out and how much time will it take to move from one place to another. So, not everything went the way we had imagined. The hitchhiking experience for both teams was pretty different. Me and Sarah were incredibly lucky. All the rides we found were quite long, everything went smoothly, and we made it to Buda by the end of the second day of hitchhiking. However, Alex and Linnea did not really move forward the first days. At least, not as fast as we had expected to. It would have been ideal if we would have moved forward in the same tempo. But the reality was that at some point there was approximately 600 kilometers between us, and that is a long distance. Luckily, everything went well and they made it to Buda by the end of the third day. What can we learn from it? Hitchhiking is an unpredictable mode of transport. You never know how much time will it take you to get to the destination, or where exactly you end up at the end of the day. Sometimes we are more lucky, sometimes not, but this way of traveling is definitely sustainable. By sharing the car with other people, you help to combat congestion and cut CO2 emissions, and you are also saving a lot of money. Transportation is the single largest source of air pollution. We thought that it would be interesting to compare traveling by car alone and traveling with more people in it, and also compare it to traveling by train. How much emission is caused by a train? How much by a car? We found a figure that shows emissions per passenger per kilometer traveled. It can be seen from the figure that when you travel by car alone, you produce 171 grams of emissions, while traveling in a group of 4 people, only 43 grams. That's almost 4 times less emissions. The passenger who is traveling by train produces 41 grams of emissions.
What are the most sustainable types of accommodation? The hospitality sector has a big impact on the environment, mostly because of the huge consumption of water and energy. Also, unnecessary packing, endless amount of printed papers, and tons of laundry to be washed. Our original plan was camping. No use of energy and minimal consumption of water. However, we were extremely lucky to be picked up by some amazing people along the way. They offered us a place to sleep, and looking out of the window in the next morning, we were especially grateful to have spent the night in a warm bed instead of out in the snowstorm that had been going on during the night. After one night camping in a garage of a friend's friend in Bodø, we made the decision to rent a smaller cabin for our stay in Lofoten. Even though the weather forecast might have been the main reason, it facilitated our journey a lot. We had no longer had to worry about where to spend the night, and we literally saved our bags by not having to carry those clumsy backpacks around. The cabin was small, very small, but it was enough for us and our needs. We had no running water, no shower, and nothing but an outhouse as a toilet. It was kind of a wake-up call for us to realize how much water we normally consume. Having to melt snow in order to wash up the dishes, we quickly learned how to use a minimal amount of water. Showers were in best case replaced by a swim in the lake, and going days without washing ourselves properly, as we're used to, became food for thought. Is it really necessary to spend 10 or even 15 minutes under warm running water every single day? Or just a simple thing as brushing your teeth. How much water do you usually consume, and how much could you possibly reduce this amount without having any impact? Some nights we spent on trains and ferries where we in best case could manage to get a few hours of sleep. One consequence of our poor quality of sleep was the inability to stay awake during the bus rides around the islands. Luckily, I managed to keep my eyes open during our last ride, and wow, the landscapes are just incredible. I spent one night camping just in order to reach the seaweed harvesting on time, and it ended up being a truly wonderful experience. I've come to the conclusion, though, that camping can be a great option, not only for being sustainable in many ways, but also for the experience itself. However, you'll be heavily dependent on the weather, especially in winter times, and it will be inconvenient to carry around all of the equipment. So with this in mind, we were all happy to spend the majority of the trip in our little cabin.
How can we eat sustainably while traveling? While we had some food with us before leaving, when we reached Bodø and Lofoten, we went dumpster diving. While it depends a lot on luck, this is the best method of eating sustainably. We found many products, from yogurt, ham, and butter to an entire salmon. All of this food would have been wasted. In some places, food excess produces so much waste that people can eat full time only from the dumpster. One other alternative is Too Good To Go. This app offers businesses the chance to sell their older products for a much lower price instead of throwing them out. We bought an entire bag of pastry with 35 NOK, which is the price of 1.5 croissant. We also decided to make our own bread instead of buying it. Since Lofoten prides itself with promoting sustainable traveling, we wanted to see how sustainable are the local food-related businesses. First, we visited a local fishery. Mohammed, the manager, gave us a tour of the facility, and he explained how the whole process is done, only with salt, and nothing gets wasted. Meanwhile, we were seeing lots of fish hanging around the port, so we went to another fishery to ask about it. According to Thomas, the manager, the heads are dried inside using only heat, while the body stays outside hanging for 2 or 3 months, drying naturally. Thomas is a fisherman by craft, and after the interview, he said he is aware of the seas having less fish every year, but the demand keeps coming. Lastly, we went to talk to the owners of Lofoten Seaweed, who gave us a better understanding of why seaweed is such an underrated superfood.
What you're doing is giving your body a little bit of extra nutrition. You're putting vitamins and minerals into your bread, but also iodine, which is a huge problem in many countries at the moment, that people have too low levels of iodine, and especially young females. So it's really important, to try and get a little bit of seaweed into your diet every day, because it's the highest naturally occurring iodine in any food source that we have. And normally you get iodine from white fish, for example, from eggs, from milk, but you have to eat quite a big amount of it to get your daily recommended dose. Whereas with seaweed, you need just a very, very little sprinkle on your food and you get your daily recommended dose of iodine. And people still think, oh, seaweed, oh, do you eat that? That's gross. You know, they're really, people still, some people have that attitude, but most people are starting to understand that it is going to be a real source of protein in the future, because everyone knows we can't keep farming off the land, we can't keep eating meat, unlimited. We have to find a new food source, and it has to be sustainable.
Can you explain a bit more, like in what way this is more sustainable than other types of food?
Yeah, so there is lots of reasons. Firstly, when it grows, it doesn't need any fresh water to grow. We don't need to chop down any trees. It doesn't produce methane emissions like cows do. It doesn't need any pesticides. It just grows naturally in the water, and that's whether you farm it or whether you wild harvest it. Both don't need anything, and it actually is quite the opposite, because when it's growing in the water, it absorbs CO2 and releases oxygen. So it's a buffer in the ocean. It's keeping the ocean less acidic. So it's really, really important for the environment that seaweed is growing. It's much more powerful than the Amazon rainforest in keeping the CO2 levels down. So, and there is so much out there. And it's untouched. It's like, it's growing, it's there. When you cut it, it grows back again every single year. So as long as you harvest it sustainably and you're not dragging like the roots out from the ocean, that you cut it at a certain level, it grows back again. So there are so many reasons why it's sustainable and good for the environment, and then it's super, super healthy as well. Okay, but it is the only plant that has high levels of, or has some levels of vitamin B12. We have tried our hardest not to use plastic in our packaging, which was we were quite nervous about it at the start when we very first bought our first like 5,000 boxes. We didn't know if it would work, whether it would keep the air out enough, and whether the seaweed would stay fresh enough. So that was a bit of a risk, but we tested it, and the seaweed is lasting really well without plastic. But it hasn't been possible to 100% eliminate it, but we feel we've done quite a good start, and we are now have been put in touch with some companies that are starting to make plastic film out of seaweed. So one day the packaging could be made out of seaweed itself, so that's super exciting. And if that actually happens and is affordable, that will be a really great way to go in the future. But we're always interested in trying to work out how we can make the packaging more sustainable.
Are there any sustainable options for tourism? During the time we spent in Lofoten, we also visited some local businesses that are trying to be sustainable. Sustainability and promoting sustainable services is becoming more and more popular. People's awareness of this topic is rising, and they are looking for opportunities that would allow them to be more sustainable. One of the small businesses that we visited was Lofoten E-Riders, who are promoting themselves as a more sustainable way to fly. They are renting out electric surfboards, which are equipped with a jet and controlled via wireless remote, and that means zero emission. All the surf tours they are offering are tailor-made. Each of the tours has a guide to ensure the safety and also to take people to the most beautiful places. We managed to have a short conversation with the guys who are leading this company and also see how these electric boards look like.
The first thing I heard about this e-foil and jetboards in 2016, but at that time the marketing was far ahead of the product. And when you surf, you always have to wait for wind and waves. Now, a few years later, the product lives up to what the marketing said a couple of years ago. And now you don't depend on wind and waves anymore, and we have two different kinds. This is an electric hydrofoil, and then we have jetboards. These are these boards here. You can see them, and they're also electric. They take about 1 hour to charge. It's really fast. This is a speed charger, and with this battery, which you saw here, fits in this compartment, you can ride on or above the water for about up to 90 minutes. You don't need to fill up like benzene, petrol, anything. You just have a recharged battery, put it in, and you go. Here, it's like zero emission. You will love it when you go out because you hardly hear anything. It's an electric motor. Also, we don't want people to go somewhere where they shouldn't be, like places or like where they're like birds nesting. Totally amazing if you just have this sound of this electric motor, and you're not using up any fuel or anything. And if you combine the fun with sustainability.
The other great project that we heard about is something that Lofoten Seaweed is planning to do. The idea they have come up with is to offer people an opportunity to take part in harvesting seaweed and also eat something that would contain seaweed. More and more people are curious about seaweed, the harvesting process, and the food that is made of seaweed. So why not to give people the opportunity to actually try it out and let them get the full experience?
We've had a lot of questions, people wanting to come out and harvest with us. They want to experience harvesting, they want to learn about the different types. Maybe they want to learn so that when they go home they can try and harvest themselves for their own use. And we have done that for many groups, but this year we're kind of taking it to the next level. There will be a specific offering out in O, where we will have guides taking tourist groups out by a rib boat out to special locations which we have found, and they will get the chance to swim around. They're going to have dry suits on and they're going to have snorkels and masks, and they'll swim around and see the seaweed. They will harvest some, bring it back, and then the chef in the restaurant where they're staying will cook up meals with seaweed in it. So, and I think until, it's one thing to see it growing there, but until you get the chance to eat it, the whole experience is completely different. Like, it makes so much more sense when you get the chance to try it in your food. It'll be really interesting for the tourists, or if I was a tourist, I would certainly be really interested. And as seaweed is becoming more and more popular all around the world, I think more and more people are curious about it, want to see what it's all about, want to try eating it. Last year we had courses where people could either have a tasting menu of different seaweed dishes and learn a little bit about seaweed, and we also had food making courses where people could come and cook themselves with seaweed and have a go at with a chef, learning to cook different dishes with seaweed in it. This year we hope to have more of a restaurant concept where people can come in and maybe you'd have a 5-course tasting menu with different seaweed.
So after 12 days of traveling and investigating about sustainability, it got even more clear how complex this subject is. It's a huge challenge which requires consciousness from every layer of society. This investigation has been very enlightening for us as individuals, and we've come to the conclusion that sustainability can only be achieved with individuals being conscious, informed, and actually wanting to make a difference. When these individuals then go together and start to cooperate is when things are starting to move. Seeing the girls working at Lofoten Seaweed is one example of what brings us hope for the future. There are plenty of smaller businesses and projects out there that are very promising. It's just a matter of finding them and, more importantly, to support them.